Medieval guilds are usually remembered as monopolies, closed shops that blocked competition and kept outsiders out. And that's true. But that same closed shop mentality is also the reason people trusted a guild mark stamped on a loaf of bread or a bolt of cloth without ever meeting the person who made it. The very thing that made guilds exclusionary is the same thing that makes your LinkedIn profile useful to a recruiter who's never met you. That contradiction is the whole video. Let's get into it. Imagine an economy with no resumes, no reviews, no certificates, no credentials, no way to check if someone is actually good at what they claim to do. Just a stranger telling you to trust them. How far would that economy get? Not very far. Without some way to prove skill, people would only trade with family, neighbors, or others they already knew personally. The moment you step outside that small circle, everything grinds to a halt. This is the problem every growing economy eventually runs into. How do you get a stranger to trust your competence before you've had the chance to prove it? It sounds simple, but it's brutally hard to solve because skill is invisible. Anyone can claim to be a skilled carpenter, a sharp negotiator, or a talented designer. Words are free. What's expensive, and therefore believable, is a signal that only a genuinely skilled person could produce. In medieval Europe, this problem became impossible to ignore. Picture a Paris bakery in the 1300s. A guild official could walk in unannounced, inspect the bread, and if it didn't meet standard, confiscate the entire batch, even loaves still baking in the oven. That single scene holds the whole problem. Somebody had to guarantee quality to people who had never met the baker. The question was, how? Medieval guilds solved this problem by building trust in layers, so no single person's word had to be taken at face value. The first layer was time. Every craftsman started as an apprentice, bound to a master for years before they could work on their own. This wasn't optional, and it wasn't quick. An apprenticeship had a required minimum length, and it had to be served under a master who had already proven their own skill. This meant nobody could fake their way to competence overnight. Skill had to be built slowly, in front of witnesses, over years. After finishing an apprenticeship, a craftsman became a journeyman, working for wages under other masters while continuing to sharpen their skill. Only after that could someone apply to become a master themselves, the top tier, and the only rank allowed to run an independent workshop and train apprentices of their own. This hierarchy did more than train workers. It created a paper trail of trust, built entirely through personal supervision, long before paper trails existed. The second layer was the mark. Once a craftsman produced goods, guilds often stamped them, a symbol pressed into cloth, metal, or bread, certifying that the item met an agreed standard. A buyer in a market stall might never meet the person who made the item in their hands. They didn't need to. The mark did the talking. It compressed years of training and oversight into a single, instantly readable symbol. The third layer was enforcement, and this is where the system had real teeth. Guild officials didn't just hand out marks and walk away. They conducted inspections, sometimes unannounced, checking raw materials, tools, and finished goods. If something didn't meet standard, it could be confiscated or destroyed on the spot. The Paris bread inspections are a clear example of this in action. And here's the detail that made the whole system self-policing. A guild's reputation was collective. If one baker sold bad bread, it didn't just damage that baker. It damaged how the entire guild was viewed by the town. That gave every member a direct, personal stake in policing their peers. Nobody wanted their own reputation dragged down by someone else's shortcuts. Put together, these three layers, a time-gated hierarchy, a physical trust symbol, an active, collective enforcement, turned invisible skill into something a stranger could see, check, and rely on, all without ever meeting the person who made the goods in their hands. This system worked well for a local economy, where the buyer and the guild inspector lived in the same town. But what happens when the person judging your competence isn't down the street, but on the other side of the planet? By the early 2000s, the problem hadn't gone away, it had gotten bigger. Businesses were no longer just hiring from the next town over. They were hiring across countries, sometimes across the world, evaluating people they might never meet in person. The guild's local, face-to-face verification system simply couldn't stretch that far. LinkedIn, launched in 2003 by Reid Hoffman and a small founding team, was built specifically around this problem. Hoffman's core idea was that transparent professional identities, profiles visible to strangers, could create trust and open up opportunity at a scale that handshakes and business cards never could. The mechanism looked completely different from a guild, but the underlying job was the same: turn invisible skill into a visible, checkable signal. Instead of a time-gated hierarchy supervised by a small number of masters, LinkedIn built a networked system of peer validation. In 2006, it introduced recommendations, written statements from connections vouching for someone's work. Later came endorsements, a single click that let a connection confirm a specific skill on someone's profile. These signals weren't inspected by an official body the way a guild mark was. They were generated by peers, at massive scale, and simply displayed. And the effect on how people are evaluated is measurable. Profiles with multiple skill endorsements draw noticeably more attention from recruiters than profiles without them. A stranger scanning a profile in seconds is making a snap judgment based on exactly the kind of signal a guild mark used to provide, just compressed into icons and counts instead of a stamp pressed into metal. LinkedIn even built tools explicitly designed around this idea. An early feature called LinkedIn Site was pitched as a way to let hiring managers judge a candidate's viability through their relationships, references, and reputation, language that could just as easily describe how a medieval town judged a craftsman's standing. But notice what's missing compared to the guild system. There's no official walking through anyone's workshop. Nobody is confiscating a bad batch of work. An endorsement can be given by someone who has never actually seen the person's work up close. The verification isn't centralized and enforced, it's distributed and voluntary. That's the trade LinkedIn made, whether intentionally or not. Guilds kept trust rigorous by keeping it small and locally enforced. LinkedIn made trust available at a global scale by loosening exactly how rigorously it was checked. Two systems, built 700 years apart, aimed at solving the exact same problem: how a stranger can trust a claim they have no way to personally verify. Now it's worth setting them side by side and looking at what happens when you strip both down to their basic mechanics. Strip away the guild hall and the smartphone screen, and what's actually left? At the core, both systems are built from the same three parts. First, a signal, something visible that stands in for invisible skill. For guilds, that was the physical mark stamped into goods. For LinkedIn, it's the endorsement or recommendation attached to a profile. Second, a verifier, someone whose judgment the signal depends on. For guilds, that was a small circle of officials with formal authority. For LinkedIn, it's a wide, open network of peers with no formal authority at all. Third, an accountability loop, a way of keeping the signal honest. Guilds enforced this through inspection and confiscation. LinkedIn relies on visibility and social consequence instead. A poorly supported claim is more likely to be ignored or quietly doubted than physically punished. Once you see these three parts, the similarities between the two systems become obvious, and they run deeper than surface-level comparison. Both rely on peer validation rather than self-declaration. A guild master had to be vouched for by other masters. A LinkedIn profile depends on connections choosing to recommend or endorse. In neither system is a person's own claim about themselves treated as sufficient. Both create path dependency. A guild career moved through fixed stages: apprentice, journeyman, master, that couldn't be skipped. A LinkedIn profile builds up in a similar way, accumulating endorsements, recommendations, and connections gradually, with a thin profile carrying less weight than one built up over years. Both turn private information into a public signal. In each case, something that only existed inside one person's head, their actual skill, gets translated into something a total stranger can see and act on without ever meeting them. And both produce exclusionary effects. Guild systems restricted trade to members, favoring insiders. LinkedIn, though open to anyone, still rewards people who already have strong networks, meaning existing advantage tends to compound. But forcing the comparison further than this would be misleading, because the two systems genuinely diverge in one major way: enforcement. Guilds had centralized, empowered enforcement. An official could physically inspect a workshop and destroy substandard goods on the spot. LinkedIn has no equivalent. An endorsement can be given with a single click by someone who has never verified the claim at all, and there's no mechanism to confiscate a false one. Guilds also deliberately restricted supply, limiting membership to protect the value of the guild mark. LinkedIn's business model depends on the opposite. The platform benefits from as many people and connections as possible, not fewer. And where a guild's reputational damage was immediate and local, a bad loaf confiscated the same day. LinkedIn's signals are diffuse and cumulative, harder to fake in any single instance, but also much harder to police as a whole. This difference points to something bigger than either guilds or LinkedIn individually. Every system built to manufacture trust between strangers is really operating on the same dial. Rigor on one end, scale on the other. Tighten verification, and the circle of people who can participate shrinks. That's what guilds chose. Open participation to as many people as possible, and verification gets diluted. That's what LinkedIn chose. Neither system escaped this trade-off. Each one simply landed on a different point along it, shaped by how many people it needed to serve. Seen this way, the guild mark and the LinkedIn endorsement aren't really two separate inventions. They're two settings on the exact same dial, built centuries apart, in response to the exact same unsolved problem, proving competence to someone who has no way of checking it themselves. If every trust system ever built sits somewhere on that same dial, rigor versus scale, it's worth asking where the next version is headed. AI-generated resumes, automated endorsements, profiles filled out in seconds. All of it pushes further towards scale and further from rigor. So here's what I want to know. As verification gets easier to fake, are we heading toward a new guild era? Smaller, harder to enter, more rigorously verified professional circles, or some new mechanism we haven't invented yet? Drop your best guess in the comments.